I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you about bees because it is my passion behind DNA and forensics, I guess, since I spent a lot of time doing that. But I usually walk around, but since the microphone is here, I'm going to have to stick in one place, so I'll probably use my hands a lot. And I'll probably go fairly quickly at the beginning, just because I think what is relevant that you guys want to really understand is toward the end, and raising honeybees and what is affecting the honeybees as far as what we're doing to the environment. But I wanted to talk about native bees a little bit because that's what you'll find in your yards. And I'm going to try my hardest to talk you into not killing them, but to learn how to live with them. So because they really are not, and their stings don't hurt very bad most. So I'm going to do my best to try to talk you into living with them. So today's topics, I want to talk about how to plant plants and what kind of plants, how a bee pollinates our flowers and our crops. Also, I have to talk a little bit about bee biology since I'm a biologist. And we'll hit the types of nests and the types of bees, some of the equipment that we use in raising bees and hives, and the pests that affect hives, and of course the bee products that we get. So the bee-friendly plants that we need are high nectar plants and a high pollen content. These are native plants, no hybrids. Hybrids, they decrease the pollen and they decrease the nectar. So native plants. You also need to be aware of the location of where you're planting the plants, whether they're shady plants or sunny plants, whether how much moisture they take, wet moisture or a wet place or a dry place, and the soil type, if your soil is acidic, neutral, or basic. You also need to sequence the blooming time. Bees are active from usually December, maybe even up to January, and then they hibernate through the winter months, and then they'll become active again March or April. So you need to sequence the blooming time so a bee has a nectar source all through the times that they're active. And also clump your plants. Having one single plant is not going to do much for a bee and the beehive. You need to clump at least a 2x2 area of native plants. So bee-friendly plants, even if you have a balcony, you can plant asters in a pot and you'll attract a couple of bees, and that is bee food. So even if you don't have a lot of space, just a flower pot will attract a bee and provide some pollen and some nectar if it's the right plant. I know people that live in the city or the town, they aren't going to like this, but leave your dandelions. Please do not spray them. Just leave them. Maybe pay off your neighbors. I don't know. But dandelions are a great source of nectar and pollen for a bee. So, and you can eat the leaves too, as long as there's no pesticides. So some of the native plants in a sunny location and are sumac, black-eyed Susan, purple coneflower, ironweed, goldenrod, asters, and blazing stars. And you can see the bloom time. They go from March until December. So you need to sequence the bloom time to when the bees are active. So shade plants, we're a little limited on shade plants in Kansas, being a natural prairie. So beard tongue, blue verbena, great blue, and cardinal flowers are also the shade plants that you can sequence from April to October. I wasn't able to find any through December, and I haven't been able to find any shade plants to plant in my own yard that bloom through December. So usually we use some trees or shrubs. Flowers that are pollinated by bees are colorful, but they cannot pollinate red flowers. So any red flowers, they're useless to bees. And most flowers that are pollinated by bees, they have a landing platform and they're mildly fragrant. Bees are intelligent and they have good eyesight, including UV. And later on, I'll show you why UV light is such important for a bee. They have a good sense of smell and they can detect electrical fields. And that's how they actually detect pollen, is through an electrical charge, a static charge. So with static charged flowers, the pollen sources have electric fields that are sensed by the small hairs on the bee. And later I'll get into cuckoo bees, and those are bees that are bad that you can get rid of. And those are bees that mimic the native bees, and they're shinier and they don't have as much hair and they do not pollinate. And so to tell the difference between a cuckoo bee and a bee that is a pollinator is you look at the hairs, and the hairs are what senses the pollen with the electrical fields. So I mentioned the UV eyesight for a bee. In visible light, the dandelion looks yellow, and in UV light, it actually is red with white. Reason why red flowers are not good for bee pollinators. And you'll notice down at the bottom, there's kind of streaks in the bottom flower going into the center where the pollen is found. And that's because those are nectar guides. So flowers have nectar guides of lines or dots that guide the bee into the pollen, concentrated pollen area. So the petals in the visible light, you don't see any pollen line or any nectar guides, but in the UV light, you can see the nectar lines on the petals. And orchids, again, you can really see the nectar guides in orchids. But to your eyes, you can't see them. But a bee, they're a traffic way to the pollen. So a lot of people kill bees because they think they're wasps. And we do have one bee, it's called the plaster bee, that does kind of look like a wasp. But it's very easy to tell a bee from a wasp in that a bee is hairy, they have hairy legs, and they're fat. They have really round abdomens. Where a wasp, the body is smooth legs, and it's long, abdomen is long, it's not fat. So we have two types of bees, the solitary bees, which are what native bees are, and that's what most species of bees are, and they're very individual. Each female will lay an egg in a cell, and then she'll cap that and she'll leave. She doesn't take care of the babies. The babies will hatch and take care of themselves. There isn't a community involved. There isn't, it's totally solitaire. They don't form hives. The female bee gathers the leaves or mud for their nests, and every female is fertile, as opposed to the next type of bee, which are eusocial bees. And these have a very complex social organization within their hive, and they practice complex behaviors and they make group decisions to decide how is best for their community to survive. Individual females are sterile. There's only one female in the hive that can produce eggs, and that is the queen. And the other females are workers in that they gather food, they make comb, they nurse the babies, and they take care of the queen. The males do absolutely nothing, except they do fertilize the queen so she can lay eggs. And the queen only mates She mates multiple times, but only one period. So a queen will fly out of the hive, find a swarm of drones, and the male bees are called drones. She'll mate with hundreds of drones, and all those eggs are now fertilized, and she'll go back to the hive and start laying them. So they get diversity in that she mates with several different types of drones, but all on the same period, and then goes back to the hive and starts laying all the eggs within the cells of the hive. The hive, whether it survives or not, is dependent on the queen, on one bee, the queen bee, whether she lays healthy eggs or she is a good layer of eggs. So as I said, we have a drone, which are the male bees, and the queen and the worker. And the physiology and how you can tell those types of bees apart in the queen is quite a bit bigger than drones or workers. And the drone is short and wide, and the worker is what you see mostly on the flowers. So the queen bee stays only in the hive to lay the eggs. So some of the solitary bees, which are the native bees, or the sweat bees, which I'm sure you've seen. They're the metallic blue-green that land on you, and they're good at lopping up human sweat. And then the leafcutter bees, mason bees, plaster bees, and mining bees. Some of the eusocial bees are the honeybees, bumblebees, primitive carpenter bees, and sweat bees. And I will put a caveat on not getting rid of bees. If you do have a carpenter bee infestation, they will do a lot of damage to your wood, your siding, and it would be okay to get rid of those. Most of what we see in Kansas are ground nesting bees. So they actually look like anthills. So if you see ground up that actually looks like an anthill, but you see no ants, it's probably a ground nesting bee hive. They grow in, or they dig their nests in sparsely vegetative soil, and they don't travel very far. They stay by their nests, so they have to have a food source fairly close to their nests. They don't collect material for the nest, the cellophane bees. The cellophane bees actually excrete cellophane type substance that they put around the inside of the hole in their nest, and it covers the brood and allows food for the brood also. Wood or tunneling nesting bees, and these are the mason, the leaf cutter, and the carpenter bees. They have to collect their nest material close to where they're going to build the nest, and that usually is mud, leaves, or wood. And again, they don't leave the nest very far, so they need a food source fairly close to the nest. A chimney bee nest, you usually find it around a chimney. And then the carpenter bee nest, they do bore into wood, so wood siding is a open source for them. Sweat bees, they're tunnels, which you might have seen. They're usually on the ground, but they're a tunnel standing up, and they usually have 3 or 4 together, and they only travel about 200 yards from their nests, so they need a food source fairly close. And they divide the tunnels with walls to separate each cell because they are solitary bees, so each female has their own little tunnel. And then if you see wood with holes that are capped, those are usually mason bees. So carpenter bees won't cap the holes, and mason bees will cap the holes. So know the difference so you're not killing any mason bees. Mason bees do not chew wood. They already go into areas that already have tunnels in the wood, so they won't destroy your house. So we already hit the types of bees: the bumblebee, carpenter, leafcutter, plaster, mason, mining, sweat, and honeybee. These bees are all found in Kansas. The honeybee is not a native bee to Kansas. It's not a native bee to the North America. It's from Asia. So honeybees are not native bees. And then I would like to talk about cuckoo bees, which we'll get into a little bit later. First, I want to talk about the bumblebee. Bumblebees are very important if you're going to grow tomatoes because they pollinate tomatoes. So you don't want to get rid of bumblebees. Your tomato yield will go down. So they're social. They have over 250 species, and they're a big bee, but they don't have barbed stingers, so they can sting you several times, but they are not aggressive. The only way a bumblebee is going to sting you is if you swat at it, if you try to crush it. They are not aggressive bees. And again, they're important pollinators of tomatoes. And how they do this is they beat their wings at a frequency that hits a note of middle C. The anthers of a tomato plant then release the pollen when it hits that frequency. So it's a very sophisticated interaction between bumblebees and tomatoes. The Flight of the Bumblebee, as I'm sure you've all heard, it's an orchestra written for the opera, composed in 1899. And it was a composition especially written to try to mimic the chaotic and rapid changing flying pattern of a bumblebee. So now you know a little bit about the opera. The Carpenter Bee, again, this is not a really good bee. They are not good pollinators either. They're solitary bees. They don't have barbed stingers, so they can sting multiple times, and they will drill through wood and cause serious damage. However, the good thing about a carpenter bee, it's a specialist in pollinating maypop flowers. So if you're growing maypop flowers, you need a carpenter bee because they're a specialist in pollination of maypop flowers. So even the bad and the ugly of bees have good points. The mason bee, they're solitary bees, and they use mud or, well, usually mud to cap off and make their nests. They're not aggressive, and they will only sting if you crush them. So if you step on one before you kill it, it might sting you. The mining bees, we have a lot of mining bees around Kansas. They're solitary, but they nest in aggregations. So even though they're a solitary bee, you may find 1,000 mining bees together in one area. So they don't look like they're solitary, but remember the females, each of them are laying, each of them lay one egg and they leave, they don't take care of them. So they're considered solitary. And they nest in lawns and underground. And the stingers aren't powerful enough to even penetrate your skin. So these are basically a non-stinging bee for humans. The leaf cutter, if you see a leaf that is neatly cut in a round circle, that's probably a leaf cutter bee. And it's not jagged, it looks like a pair of scissors actually cut the circle out of the leaf. However, they do not kill the plant. They will only take enough out of the leaf. They know they need that plant to live. They'll only take enough to build their nest, and they'll go on to a different plant if they need more material. They won't kill the plant. And their sting is about like a mosquito bite. So not a bad stinger. The leafcutter bee actually saved the alfalfa crop in Kansas in 1940. They used commercial leafcutter bees. They brought them in to pollinate the alfalfa. And again, they don't kill the plants when they take the leaf part for their nests. So they saved the alfalfa crop in the 1940s. Their population is decreasing rapidly in the United States also. The sweat bee, we've already talked a little bit about those. The bees are they're solitary ground bees. They have really short tongues, and that's why they're called sweat bees. They really like human sweat, and the short tongues are actually very good for lopping up the salt and the sweat off of humans. They aren't aggressive. They're kind of annoyance, but they aren't aggressive, and the stings are considered one of the less painful, more like a mosquito bite. But it is hard to get a sweat bee to sting you. You pretty much have to swat it onto your skin. This is the bee that people get mixed up with wasps, the plaster bee. They're slender, they're hairy, but they aren't as hairy as your typical bee. And you'll notice their legs are round like a wasp. And that's where a lot of people get a wasp mixed up with the plaster bee. They do have specialized pollen that they, in a pocket that they carry the pollen with. Now the cuckoo bees, these bees you can actually get rid of. They are parasites to bees, and they invade the brood, and the brood is where baby bees are living. They invade, they kill the larvae, they eat the nectar and the pollen of the native bee, and they lay their eggs in the nest. So they come in and they steal the native bee's nest. They are not good pollinators. They don't have any specialized hair or pollen pockets to carry pollen. So cuckoo bees, you can get rid of. The problem with cuckoo bees, they're hard to tell apart from the native bees. As you can see, the cuckoo bee for the bumblebee, they look almost like a bumblebee. They mimic the bees really close. The difference is they usually don't have as much hair as the native bee. Here's a red-tailed cuckoo bee, and you can see it's pretty hairy, but right here, it's shiny, whereas the red-tailed bumblebee has much more hair. So, but they're very hard to tell apart. A buff-tailed cuckoo mimics the buff-tailed bumblebee. There's a leafcutter cuckoo that mimics the leafcutter bee, and this is more, you can see better that they have less hair, a lot less hair than the native bee. The sweat bee, one of the cuckoos, is a lot different than the sweat bee. It has a red body instead of the blue-green metallic. Now I'd like to get into that more on the honeybees and the Africanized bees and kind of what's affecting our honeybees now. The first threat was the Africanized bee, just because people got so paranoid that the bees were going to attack them, because you heard about them attacking and killing people, animals. And so people weren't tolerant of honeybees at all, because they look exactly alike. So especially in the South, a lot of honeybees lost their lives because a lot of people thought they were Africanized bees. They have hives of 800,000, so they're huge hives, and they're very, very aggressive. They're located now in the United States, in the West and in the South, and in South America. They'll never make it to Kansas because we have too cold of winters. We're too cold. Now, eventually, if we keep on warming up, they will make it to Kansas, but they can't stand the cold winters. their venom is no more dangerous than the average honeybee. And they only sting once because they have barbed stingers. So when the stinger goes into your skin, when they pull it out, it pulls their body apart. So they do only sting once. And right now, the habitats that's suitable for the Africanized bee is in Florida, Texas, and further up the West Coast. The honeybee, not native to Kansas, great pollinators. There's only 7 species, and a colony can survive for many, many years as long as the queen is very strong. They have barbed stingers, so they only sting once. So a honeybee colony has 20 to 80,000 bees, whereas the Africanized bees had 800,000 in a hive. The Africanized bees are very, very aggressive, that once you bother them, they will swarm, and that's how they kill their victims, is they swarm, and the whole nest, 800,000 bees or more, will swarm that individual, each of them stinging once, enough venom to kill a person. Going in water does not do any good because they will wait for you to come up. They're aggressive. So if you are attacked by a swarm of Africanized bees, the best thing to do is get in a vehicle. You are going to get stung, hopefully not as much, enough to kill you. So honeybees are not that way. They are semi-aggressive. Russian honeybees are a little more aggressive than European honeybees. But if you happen to kill one when you're actually in the hive, they send out a pheromone that all the defensive bees will then attack to try to get you away from the hive. That's why we use a smoker that disperses the pheromone, so then we don't have an attack going on. A queen can live up to 5 years. A natural hive out in the nature, they know when their queen is starting to fail. So the worker bee will lay an egg that'll be fed royal jelly to turn a new queen, to raise a new queen. They'll then kill the old queen. Once that new queen hatches and she is laying eggs, then they'll kill the old queen, and the hive keeps turning over then. One thing about a honeybee that is quite amazing is called the honeybee dance. And I said before that the hive is a collective organism, but they think and make decisions as a community. So the worker bees will go out, find a nectar source. They will come back and do a honeybee dance. So they'll get in the hive and they'll dance jaggedly within the hive, and that communicates to the other bees where the nectar source is. This dance consists of where the sun is, where the nectar source is, and where the hive is. So within that dance, they tell the other honeybees where the shortest distance to the nectar source is in relation to the sun and where the hive is. So that dance changes throughout the day as the sun moves. So they're saying, with the calculations that they do in their sesame seeds brain, it's faster than most computers can do that calculation on how to tell where the nectar source is from the hive using the sun's position. So they're actually amazing creatures. Now to get into more beekeeping, we do have 2 types of hive. The first one is a ray top bar hive, and it mimics more what you see in nature. So as you can see over here, these are the honeycomb hanging down, and that's more what you see in a tree. So it's more mimicking of what you see in nature. However, they aren't standardized. The equipment can be quite expensive since it's not used commercially, and you usually get a decreased yield. So what is used commercially is called the Langstroth hive, and those are the typical frames that you see, and they're spaced a certain amount distance apart, so the comb then just is right up next to each other, so there's no space, because a queen will not lay an egg if there's space between the comb. So they make the comb so it's right up next, and she just crawls in, lays an egg, goes to the next one, lays an egg. And if you see out somebody that has a hive, you'll see them stacked in boxes. And on the bottom is the brood chamber. That's where the queen is, and she stays in the brood chamber. And then all the upper chambers are where they make the comb, and they put the pollen, and they put the honey within that stack of the hive. Personal protective equipment. If you're an old-time beekeeper, you usually don't wear anything but a hood and a smoker, but it needs to be comfortable. I prefer a bug baffler, just the screen, and light gloves. For the site selection for bees, it's better to be facing south so they get the afternoon, or so they get the morning sun and afternoon shade. They need to be off the ground, and they have to have a fresh water source. And a lot of people don't realize that bees need a fresh water source. So you need some type of water source near a hive. And then your plant selection, which you control. Pests for bees: animals, bugs, insects, mites, and diseases, bacterial and viral diseases. So animals, skunks and bears will get into a hive and just disseminate it. Mice, in the wintertime, especially in Kansas, will get in and eat the honey and end up killing the hive. Right now, the biggest threat to bees are humans and pesticides. Pesticides are 500 million bees killed in Brazil, 50,000 bees dead in the Oregon parking lot after spraying with pesticides, and 37 million bees dead in Ontario, Canada, which there was a direct link to them planting a cornfield with neonicotinoids, which are neuroactive insecticides. Some of the trade names for neonics are TriStar. I have some up there that you can read. I'll let you read and so these are neonics. Disseminate honeybees and native bees. They're linked to adverse ecological effects. Not only do they kill honeybees, but they also decrease the bird population because of the insect population decreasing. It's also very controversial that whether they cause harm to bees, because what happens is the bees is exposed, it doesn't kill them right away. It's a neurotoxin. It disorientates them so they can't get back to the hive. They can't get back to the hive, they can't do the honeybee dance to tell where all the other nectar is. So you've got all the bees not communicating and dying before they get back to the hive, and it takes a while for the effect of the neurotoxin, but eventually it'll lead to colony collapse disorder, or CCD. That's why the scientific evidence is so controversial, is because there's not a direct link. There's some time in between before you see the colony collapse. In banning neonics, in 2017, they actually did a study with honey samples around the globe, and 75% of the honey samples had neonics present in the sample. The highest rate was in North America with 86%. In 2015, Montreal banned all neonics without exceptions on all properties within city limits, including the botanical garden and all agriculture areas and all golf courses. In 2018, states of the European Union put a total ban on neonics, except within enclosed greenhouses. In 2019, the United States finally banned 12 products with neonic, but leaving 47 on the market. We have yet to ban those 47 products. Another disruptor of bees, native and honey, are how we now do agriculture with monoag. It's a single crop in a farming system, and it's widely used in industry and organic farming just because of the increased efficiency in planting and harvesting. But while you get that increase in efficiency of planting and harvesting, it also has increased pests and diseases, which affect not only honeybees, but any native species. The bugs that affect honeybee hives are small hive beetle, another reason not to have the hive on the ground. These small hive beetle infestate the individual cells of a honeybee. They lay their larvae, and then the queen has no place to lay her eggs. They don't kill the hive right off, but eventually they'll make it so weak and so vulnerable to diseases that the hive collapses. The latest threat, which has been in the last couple of years, is the Asian great hornet, and also known as the murder hornet. And now the official name they've come up with is the northern giant hornet. It's about 2 inches long. It came from Asia. It was actually accidentally introduced through Washington, through the ports, to North America. Most of the sightings have been in Washington State, and the Department of Agriculture of Washington has been trying to control the giant hornet. There's been a few sightings in Canada. Honeybees are so adaptive, they have now adapted a new way, a defense against the giant hornet, in that they call a hot defensive ball. So the swarm of honeybees will come out and encase the hornet and roll the hornet until the temperature raises 1 degree above what kills the honeybee. It'll kill the hornet. So some of the honeybees around the hornet will die because of the temperature, but the rest of the hive will survive because they stay within that temperature. So now they form a hot ball that will kill the hornet through their temperature to be able to protect their hive. Mites, the Varroa mite, and this is actually what I got interested in because in University of Minnesota is doing some genetic studies on bees that actually are trying to develop bees that are resistant to Varroa mite, because this is a killer of bees. It takes a long time for a hive. We treat hives, but eventually, if you have a Varroa mite infestation, it would kill the hive. So, and it's kind of like a deer tick. They remove body fluids, but it's not lethal alone, but it weakens the animal, which would be weakening the hive, since a hive is a collection, that it leads to death. And it would be like us carrying a basketball that is sucking blood and body fluids. That's what it's like to a bee to have one Varroa mite. And usually when you have infestation, there's 5 or 6 on a bee. Tracheal mite, it only affects their trachea. It's a small mite. It actually can be treated. Bacterial diseases, we have one that's American foul brood, and the reason how you tell American foul brood is actually you go into the hive and you pull out the larvae. The larvae are dead and it just does a yellow roping. And you can also tell when the caps on a hive, they cap the babies, and usually there's a hole in the cap. the only treatment if you get an American foul brood is to burn the hive. And usually it goes from hive to hive. So you may end up burning 5 or 6 hives, including the bees. Everything has to be burnt. American foul brood, you can tell when the tracheal tubes are actually pronounced in melted larvae. So they get in and you take off the caps and you look at the larvae. And if it's a dull white, or if the larvae has started to decay and there's pronounced white spots, that's the tracheal tubes, you can treat European foul brood with antibiotics. Some of the bee products, I'm sure honey, beeswax, pollen, propolis, royal jelly, and venom. Propolis is what they use to make their hives airtight in the wintertime. And it's very sticky, and it's used a lot in glues. And also it's very nutritious. The secondary products, of course, are baked goods, candles, soaps, and lotions. Honey is the only food that includes all the substance necessary to sustain life. It has enzymes, vitamins, minerals, and water. Contains an antioxidant associated with improved brain function. Honey is the only food that humans can consume from an insect. And I put this out there to inspire all of our Kansans. This is actually from, the honeybee is the Kansas insect, and it's from a House Bill 2236. And I'd like to read it. It said, the honeybee is like all Kansas in that it is proud. It only fights in defense of something that it cherishes, is a friendly bundle of energy. It always helping others throughout its lifetime. It's strong, a hard worker with limitless abilities, is a mirror of virtue, triumph, and glory. The honeybee, by making its honey, gives not only to Kansans, but also to all the world's peoples a gift which is sweet and wholesome, something which all Kansas strive to emulate in other ways. So that's it for honeybees. So do you have any questions? Yes. The bill? It's actually, it was a resolution just for passing as the honeybee is a state insect for Kansas. So it's House Bill 2236. All it is inspirational. We don't have any bills specifically to protect honeybees. Not on the Kansas level, I'm afraid. So, yes.
I got a couple of questions. You said that red flowers don't work well on that. See, with the UV light, red flower probably looks black to them.
You know, I'm not sure how a red flower looks.
Are different bees aggressive to different bees? Carpenters or masons?
Not to my knowledge. They all live together. Even Africanized bees will live within a honeybee. They actually crossbreed. That's why the African bees are not becoming so aggressive, is because they're actually interbreeding with the honeybee, the European honeybee.
But the temperature, like when they would ball up around
the giant hornet.
I've read where the hives are normally kept that they can keep the hive at around.
Yes.
And so what is the temperature that kill the hornet?
It's like 1 degree above what'll kill a bee. Yeah, whatever that is. It is temperature related for the giant hornet, but right now Washington State is trying to contain the giant hornet within their state, because and I'm sure they won't be able to do it with all the global transportation. So they haven't studied the hornet within the environment of the United States yet, but more than likely it will not survive where it's hot in the south. So winters, I haven't read anything about yet. I think it's too early that they haven't done the research yet, as opposed to the African bee that they won't come north.
How many hives do you have?
I have 4. I have 4. And actually I developed a allergic reaction to venom. So I became desensitized last year. I took shots to desensitize. So yeah, I gotten stung so many times I become allergic to it. So it was kind of a bummer, but I haven't got stung since I've been desensitized, but I think I'll probably go to the hospital parking lot, take a bee with me and have it sting me so I'm close to the hospital. So take a few EpiPens. So, but yeah, our monoculture is really,
So you have plenty of flowers that assist the bees that are using?
yes, we actually live a mile from Clinton. So we have quite a few natural habitat for them. And I've also planted a lot of perennials, a lot of native plants. So, and I have quite a few trees. So don't forget trees. Trees are good pollinators source, yes. The small hive beetle, there's actually, you can use oil in little traps and they fall down in that, and you just throw away the traps after they get down in the traps. The traps sit between the frames of the hive and you just put oil and it's attracted. They're attracted to it and they fall down in. Uh-huh. No, no. And then you just throw the traps away with a small hive beetle. They will live together. You just want to keep the population of the small hive beetle down. Did you get small hive beetle? Yeah, that's, yeah, you won't be able to keep that way. You'll need to put the oil traps in between each frame and then just replace them and throw them away. Do you treat for Varroa mite? Haven't? Yeah, you will, because otherwise that'll get your hives. So, did you have? Is there a center that's black? Are there? If the pollen, they probably aren't the best nectar source, but if they have a white center or a yellow center, then the bee will be able to see that center. They won't be able to see the flower, so it's not a good, but that's why you have to clump them so they see a lot of the centers. So, but yeah, red is not a good flower for pollinators. Any other questions?
Slide again with the list of flowers and the times they bloom.
Actually, let me.
John, you just commit those to memory. So, Einstein said never memorize anything.
K-State has a great site for native plantings too for bees. So I have to put a plug in for K-State, even though I'm a KU person, but support K-State. But K-State's website has great information on gardens, plantings for natives. So. It's hard to get flavored honey from a flower because you need a big source of only that flower. So if you want sweet clover honey is the best, but you have to have acres and acres of clover. And since we don't use it as a cover crop anymore, or people don't plant it as much, you don't get it. In Colombia and Honduras, they actually have coffee plants, and they put the bees on coffee plants, and it has a distinct flavor. Now, bees in the springtime, you'll have lighter honey as versus in the fall and winter. Because fall and winter usually is darker honey. It's a heavier, more molasses tasting versus the light, sweeter honey. So you can get a difference in seasons for honey. But to get a specific flower taste out of honey, lavender, you need a huge area of just that flower. Lavender you can, because there's lavender farms. So, yeah. And Washington State has a lot of blueberries. So they have some that tastes honey that has a blueberry taste in Washington State. But you have to have acres and acres of the same crop, the same nectar source. Yes. Yes, they are. And actually, almonds are only pollinated by bees that are brought up from Texas to California. So you'll see big semi-trucks of beehives, and they're transporting the bees to pollinate the almond trees in California. So, yeah, it's very specific, and fruit teas are affected by bee pollination also. The crystallization for honey, it's a natural process. It does not affect the honey. It's still good, but it's usually with the moisture content in honey, whether it crystallizes or not. When you harvest honey, it has to be at a certain moisture content for it not to crystallize, which is what commercially available honey is what they want, because people won't buy crystallized honey. So you'll need to decrease the moisture in the honey to get it crystallized. So, and temperature. Yeah, and temperature. And just let it evaporate. And over time it'll crystallize. So